if you get discouraged in life, then everything starts going down the hill. And Satan uses that so often in all of our lives. He uses it especially in the lives of the pastors, because most of us who are pastors are driven to accomplish things and to grow our churches and to see people baptized and to see people give their lives to Jesus. This is what we are all about. This is what we want to do, you see. And Satan uses discouragement, and he puts things into our heads that are not good, such as, oh, the church is not going anywhere. Our treasurer is here today, so one of the things that I look at is, how was our tithe the last month? It wasn't very good. What's going on? You know, why are people not coming? Why are people not giving? And all of those things, they go through our minds, and we become discouraged. And we say, well, maybe I'm the cause of it. Maybe I shouldn't be doing things the way I'm doing. And sometimes it can go down the hill, and sometimes the pastors, they move, and sometimes they quit. I had a friend who quit. His first assignment out of the seminary, he went into a church in California, and he had all of these good ideas and had a good new young wife, you know, who was capable, and they were just on fire, and they wanted to do all of these wonderful things. And they came into a church, and within a year, he was out. And when I asked him why, he says, you know, I just couldn't handle it. Wanted to do this and that, and there were so many discouraging events that took place that I just gave up. And you know what? He went and he became a chaplain in the United States military, 9 to 5, and didn't have to worry about working with the church. So this happens with the pastors, discouragement does. It happens with the rest of you also. The text that I'm choosing today is found in Acts chapter 18, and I want us to read that first section of that verse before I show you some of the other slides. But this is the text about Paul in Corinth. After this, Paul left Athens and went to Corinth. And Debbie is going to show you a few slides of the city of Corinth, and I want to tell you what the city of Corinth was all about. This was a city that had old temples, and this was a city that had pagan worship practiced in that city. They all worshipped this goddess, and her name was Aphrodite. And goddess Aphrodite, I want to just tell you a little bit about her real quick. She has numerous equivalents. Her name in Sumerian is Inanna. Her name in Phoenician is Astarte, Venus in Roman. And she also has parallels to Indo-European dawn goddesses such as Ushas or Aurora. According to Pausanias, the first men to establish her cult were the Assyrians. After the Assyrians, the Paphians of Cyprus, and the Phoenicians who live in the Palestine. So this goddess was worshipped by the people in Palestine. This goddess was worshipped all over the Roman Empire. So Paul, he goes into this city, the city of Corinth. And this is a huge city. Nobody believes in Jesus. Nobody even knows who Jesus is. You see what I'm saying? And Aphrodite, she had a festival of her own. By the way, the word aphrodisiac comes from the word Aphrodite. And this was celebrated all over Greece, but particularly in Athens and Corinth. At the Temple of Aphrodite on the summit of Corinth, intercourse with her priestesses was considered a method of worshiping her. So Paul, he comes into a city where it is an established religion that people would go to these temples. This is a temple of Apollo, by the way, that you see on the screen, and to the temple of Aphrodite, and they would actually engage in religious type of prostitution. Do you think he was discouraged about being in a place like this? Do you think he was having a major issue here about what was going to happen with him? I want us to look at the rest of this text here as we move on. There he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla. I want you to pay attention to this text. Because Claudius had ordered all the Jews to leave Rome. So Paul, he has some friends here. Why are they here? Why are they here now? Because the king has ordered all of the Jews to leave Rome. Paul went to see them. And because he was a tent maker, and they were, he stayed and worked with them every Sabbath. Now he had time to go into the synagogue and trying to persuade Jews and the Greeks. When Silas and Timothy came from Macedonia, Paul devoted himself exclusively to preaching, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Christ. But when the Jews opposed Paul and became abusive, he shook out his clothes in protest and said to them, "Your blood be on your heads. I'm clear of my responsibility. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles." Paul is having a hard time. We are assuming as Christians today that Paul was one of the most successful preachers ever. But do you know that Paul was ran out of most of these cities that he came to? Do you know that he had very little success with these people when he preached? He did not see the results of what he was doing. Then Paul left the synagogue and went next door to the house of Titus Justus, a worshiper of God. Crispus, the synagogue ruler, and his entire household believed in the Lord, and many of the Corinthians who heard him believed and were baptized. And one night the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision and said the following: "Do not be afraid, keep on speaking, do not be silent." Do you see what's going on here? Paul is afraid. Paul is scared. Paul is tired. He's preaching to the whole city, and not everybody is accepting the gospel. Some are, but many are not. Some are getting baptized and accepting the Jesus, but the others are not. While Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews made a united attack on Paul and brought him into court. This man, they charged, is persuading the people to worship God in ways contrary to the law. And you know what happens next, right? Just as Paul was about to speak, Gallio basically said to the Jews, "I don't care about your rules. I don't care about your religion. You guys handle it." So what do? They take Paul away. It says in verse 17, they all turned on Sosthenes, the synagogue ruler, and beat him in front of the court. And Gallio, who was in charge, the Roman governor, showed no mercy, didn't care. Paul stayed on in Corinth for some time. Then he left the brothers and sailed for Syria, accompanied by Priscilla and Aquila. Before he sailed, he had his hair cut off at Cenchrea because of a vow that he had taken. When you look at what's going on with Paul, he is having a very limited success. He is not this super preacher that we think that he is. He is somebody that is having trouble. He is somebody that goes from one city to the other with little success. When I look at my ministry and how I've gone from one church to another in the last 20 years, and I wonder about all of the people that came to the different meetings and were not baptized. You know, we all like to think about the ones, how many people we baptized. When I was in Wyoming one year, we had the meetings and we baptized 11 people. 11 people, you know. And somebody can say that, "Oh, what's 11 people?" And then somebody told me, "You know, that's more people that you guys baptized that year than all of the other rest of the churches in Wyoming put together." But when I think back on that now, and when I remember how many people came to the meetings that time, it's probably 50 or 60 people in there, and only 11 were baptized. When I think of how many people came to this church over the last 11 years, visitors who never came back. How many people have we had here who come, they come for a few months, and then they are gone? And it can be discouraging. We are all subject to discouragement. Every single one of us is subject to discouragement. There is no shortage of discouragement in the work for the Lord. If you are working for God, you are also going to face discouragement. Bible is full of men who work for God and experience discouragement. You know that, right? I mean, you have had some powerful people, prophets like Elijah, do miraculous things one day, and the next day they are completely discouraged. And they are completely scared and don't know how to handle what's coming their way. There are three things that I think contributed to Paul's discouragement in the ministry. And number one is what's on the screen right there, the large strain of the work. Paul comes to the largest and the most corrupt city in the Greece, Corinth. They're all worshiping this Aphrodite, goddess of love. Nobody knows God. Nobody believes in God. There was so much work to be done. And he just doesn't know how to accomplish it. It's just too much. When I look at the things that I want to do here at this church, sometimes it's just too much. I believe when you look at your jobs, when you look at your work, when you look at your life, you can also say to yourself, wow, there's just so much I got to do. So the large strain of the work can be too much. Another reason for his discouragement was the little success of the work. The little success. Debbie, you're already on the third one, but it's okay. I'm on the second one. The little success of the work is another reason why so many people get discouraged. You look at your life and you look at everything that you have accomplished, right? And where are you in life now? I'm looking around this congregation, and besides a number of young people over here, we have people in their 40s and 50s and 60s. Where are you in life? How much success did you really have? Did you accomplish everything you wanted to accomplish? Or do you look back on your life and you say, you know what? I did not have all the success in life that I wanted. And that can discourage you. And then number three is the lonely service of the work. Paul, he had to do all of this stuff by himself. He goes from city to city without friends, and I'll tell you, there is nothing harder than being in the work alone. I colportered years ago when I was a college student. I colportered a lot. And one summer I colportered all by myself. I didn't have a partner for some reason. And I tell you, there is nothing harder than to get up in the morning, and we had these big leather cases, square ones, and you put in there about $600 worth of books, and it's probably 50 pounds, and you got to go knock on that first door. And when there was two of us, it was easy, because we'd get up, we would have a prayer, and we would say, okay, let's go do it. And we would look at each other, and we would look down the street, and I would say, okay, you take that house, I'm going to take this one. You know what I mean? And you have a partner, and you go and you knock on the door, and you are looking over your shoulders to see how your buddy is doing, and by the time you come to the end of the block, one of you has made a sale, and you're happy because you can do this. Paul had to do it by himself. I had to do it by myself. And it was the worst feeling in the world to knock on that door, the first door, by yourself. Now, lonely service to work. If you don't have friends, if you don't have people who can encourage you, life can be discouraging. But there are also three encouragements to keep going that we see in this text that we have just read together. One of the greatest God-given encouragements are friends. If you have good friends, it is always tougher to bear problems in life alone than if you have somebody who really cares. And you see what has happened in this text? The king has ordered all of the Jews out of the city. I think God knew that Paul was being lonely, right? And he sends Aquila and Priscilla over to him. And he starts working with them together. And all of a sudden he says he has somebody that he can lean on. And that gave him the energy. And that also gave him the funds, because these people, they were the tent makers, and so was he. And he could make a little money, and he could provide for himself, and he could go and do and preach. What a blessing it is to have good friends. And I think about myself here, because I told you I'm preaching this sermon to myself. And I sometimes focus too much on how lonely the work is. And then I have to remind myself and say, you know what? In this congregation, I have good friends. And I have several who have helped me to do what I do. You know, obviously Jim and Debbie and Jerry and all of the rest of you, you know, who teach and who work, and Anna in the food bank, you know. And when I come to this church and when I see you guys working or teaching a class or cleaning the windows or sweeping the sidewalk, you know what do I feel? I feel that I'm not alone. I feel that there are other people in this church who care for this church just as much as I do. And you know what? Even if what you do is just a little thing, it makes me feel good because I see I have partners. Even if you come here once a week just to greet, you know, or just to do a little fix, you know, something, you know, it tells me, okay, I got people that I can count on. Friends, if you have friends, they give you courage. Friends, they are there to protect you against the opposition. Friends, they are there, you know, to tell you, you know what, it's going to be okay. Friends, they are there to say, even when you screw up, they are there to say, you know what, okay, fine, you screwed up, but you can do better next time. That's what friends do. That's what friends also do in your own personal life. Do you have friends like that at work? Do you have friends like that in your neighborhood? Do you have people who will support you and strengthen you and stand by you when the times are tough? If you have friends like that, they are a blessing directly from God. He gives them to us. Another reason for the encouragement is the positive results. You have seen here that in this text that we have read, Paul, he did have some positive results. A few people were baptized. A few families came into the church. And such a wonderful thing when you have something going good for you. It just gives you a lift. It gives you a boost. I mean, it can be the littlest thing, and you just feel like, wow, wonderful. I want to read a little story to you. In 1782, Charles Simeon was appointed pastor of Trinity Church in England, but the many in the congregation did not want Simeon. They wanted Brother Hammond to be their pastor. But the bishop in charge insisted on Simeon as pastor of the church, and the first thing the congregation did in rebellion was to refuse Simeon to be the afternoon lecturer. They assigned the afternoon lecturer to Brother Hammond. And when Brother Hammond left 5 years later, they gave it to another man for the next 7 years. Now, Simeon is the pastor of this congregation. Simeon tried to start a later service on Sunday evening, but the pew holders, back then you had pew holders, people who said, this is my pew. But the pew holders refused to come and locked their pew doors. Can you imagine a church? We got to get rid of these pews, I'm telling you. Put the chairs in there. They originally had little doors, you know, in each pew, and you couldn't go in there unless that door was open. So they locked their pew doors so that no one could sit in their personal pews. So he had to set up chairs in the aisles and in the corners so that those who came could sit. This went on for 12 years. Imagine pastoring a church for 12 years and your congregation, because they don't like you, they lock the pews. And if people come to church, they have to sit here in the aisles. And you got to bring in the metal chairs from the gym so they can sit in a church. How discouraging would that be? The question is, what was it that kept Charles Simeon going forward in the midst of these most discouraging situations? It was this: while many did not want him, some did. While many did not come, some did. While many were unaffected by his ministry, many were. While much was discouraging, he saw hope in the situation. And here is what he wrote: in this state of things I saw no remedy but faith and patience. The passage of Scripture which subdued and controlled my mind was this: the servant of the Lord must not strive. I want to tell you this. The servant of the Lord, me, pastor of the church, must not strive. In other words, life should not have to be hard for the preachers. Life should not have to be a fight in the church. I'm not saying this because we have a fight here, because I think, honestly, our fights are about, 2-3 years old? So I think we are doing much better than that, right? I'm not saying that, but I'm saying, you know what? Life should not, none of us should have to strive all the time. None of us should have to live and work in a state, in a situation where we have to have hard time all the time, right? Why? Because it's discouraging. The servant of the Lord must not strive. It was painful indeed to see the church, with the exception of the aisles, almost forsaken. But I thought that if God would only give a double blessing to the congregation that did attend, there would on the whole be as much good done as if the congregation were doubled and the blessing limited to only half that amount. This confronted me many, many times when without such a reflection I should have sunk under my burden. And how many people sank under their burden because they have to strive and they have to struggle, and life is not easy. We can either dwell on the negative and be discouraged, or we can encourage ourselves on the positive results that we have had over the years. You know, when you look around and you see that many people in the congregation have not grown not 1 inch, that can be discouraging. But you know what else I see in this particular congregation? There are people, young and old, who have grown a lot. Spiritually, closer to Jesus. And I, as a pastor, need to focus on that. Many visitors did not come back. But you know what? I'm looking at visitors right here who did come back. And they're here on a regular basis. Many did not get baptized, but many did. Many people still remain lost. But many people right here have accepted Jesus for the first time in their life. And this church was the reason why today they have a relationship with God. What do you focus on in your life? I'm preaching the sermon to myself, but I want you to apply it to yourself. In your life, you also have had positive things happen. You also have had good things happen. You also have had successes. You also have had times when you knew that God was there next to you, holding you, and leading you, and helping you. Do you remember those times? If I were to ask you right now to remember in your mind the time when God was closest to you, you would be able to do it, I know. Those are the times and those are the days that you need to focus on. And number 3, one of the major reasons for being encouraged is the promises of God. It is true that the friends are a good source of encouragement. You know, it is true that positive results are a good source of encouragement. But the biggest and the largest influence in our life that gives us courage is God Himself. Be not afraid, but speak, He said to Paul, and hold not thy peace, for I am with you, and no man shall set on you to hurt you, for I have much people in this city. So what did God tell him? What does God tell me? What is He telling you this morning? What is God telling you this morning? You know, I like to stop my sermon every once in a while and just ask, what's God telling you this morning? Okay? Is God telling you something valuable this morning? I'm talking to each one of you now. I know there is always a time when you can go to church and just say, wow, what a waste of time. I could have been home watching cartoons. This guy is not ready. I mean, he's even preaching a sermon to himself. I mean, how can he expect me to get anything out of this, you know? But when you really put all of that agitation behind you, and you really wonder, what's God telling me today? You will find out that there is a message in there somewhere for you. Not because Gordon is such a good planner, you know, and I planned the message for each one of you, because I didn't. But because when we talk and when we come close to God, and when we try to connect with Him, there is always something that He tells us. And that's what I want you to focus on. What's He telling you? God told Paul, speak and hold not thy peace. Don't stop, don't quit, don't let up, but speak. And the promise was, I am with you. And He sent him Priscilla and Aquila, and later Silas and Timothy joined with him, and he had this encouragement of his friends, and he knew that God was on his side. When I realize that God is on my side, that God connects with me, nothing else matters. Nothing else matters. No amount of discouragement, no amount of bad luck, no amount of things going bad, none of that matters. Another thing that God told him here is that he would have divine protection, that He was going to protect him from no matter what happens. And even though they tried to kill him, to stone him, to kick him, to beat him publicly, can you imagine a grown man being stripped and beaten publicly? God still protected him. In the end, God was still with him. And then there was one other thing that God promised him here. Promise of power. Because you remember in the verse it says, for I have much people in this city. What did this mean? It meant simply that there were those people in the city who were lost, but who are going and who were going to be saved because of the work that he was going to do. And even though the situation looked bleak, and he came into this city where they were worshiping this goddess of sex, you see what I'm saying? And God says to him, you know what? I have many people in this city. Many people in this city who are on your side and who are come to know me because of what you are doing. So God empowered him. How does God empower you and I? I have seen on TV these fires in California. Have you seen those? Man, I tell you, I saw this fire truck and the guys, and they were all sweating and they were pouring tons of fire on this one house. And you know what was happening? They couldn't put it out. I mean, it was amazing. I know from my experience, if I throw a bucket of water on fire, it goes out. And here they were spraying this house with 3 hoses, big hoses. Nothing. It was only getting worse. And I thought to myself, you know, Satan, he tries to discourage us. And he tries to pour cold water over us. And he tries to tell us that we are no good and that God doesn't love us and that our life is not going anywhere. But something burns on the inside of us. And that something is God connected with you and I. And no matter how much Satan tries to kill us and destroy us and discourage us, we are still living and we are still working and we are still positive because we know that God is in our life. I hope you know that. I hope I can remind myself of that all the time. So, in conclusion, I want to ask you this. What kind of person are you? Are you a kind of person that encourages others, or are you the kind of person that brings discouragement to others? Are you a person that focuses and sees all the negative things in life? But by the way, I already know the answer. Because I've been your pastor for 12 years. So in many cases, I already know the answer. But that's not the point. The point is, do you know the answer? Because a lot of times we don't see ourselves the way others see us. A lot of times I come to church here and I'm down and I'm depressed and I'm like, why didn't we do this better? And why, and it affects other people who work with me. And there are times when I can be a person that discourages others. I don't want to be that person. I don't want you to be that person. I'd like you to write down the name on this outline that you have. Just write down the name of one person that you are going to encourage today after the church is over, or even before the church is over. And then I also want you to write down on that piece of paper 3 ways on how you can do that. How do you encourage somebody? How do you make somebody's life a little bit better? How do you tell somebody that they are valuable? How do you tell somebody that God loves them? How do you tell somebody that you appreciate them? Is it going to be a card? Is it going to be a note? Is it going to be a phone call? What is it going to be? God bless you as you think about this, and I ask that He give you that name that you need to connect with today. Amen.